On the show today, we have Erica Hornthal. Erica is known as the therapist who moves you, and she's a dance movement therapist and professional counselor. She's the founder and CEO of Chicago Dance Therapy and creator of the Dance Therapy Advocates Summit. As a licensed talk therapist, Erica knows that words only get us so far, whereas if we're willing to tap into its power, the body can take us the rest of the way as we process emotions and strengthen our mental health. The practice of dance movement therapy provides the structure and space for people to truly listen to their bodies. This practice isn't about being a perfect dancer, and it's not just a way to let loose and have fun. It's learning that movement is life. Our movements influence our thoughts, which influence our behavior, which makes us who we are. So Erica, it's great to have you here today. It's a real pleasure to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to come on the Embodiment podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. When I got your email, I was so excited. And I have such a passion for what I do. So I'm always interested in talking more about it.
Fantastic. So let's start right there. Let's go right back to basics. And perhaps you can just give us a bit of an introduction to what is dance movement therapy? What kinds of benefits does it bring?
So I always say that it is dependent in terms of the definition as to who is defining it, right? That I am certainly not the first person to practice dance movement therapy, and I won't be the last. And what I've decided to, or what I've done over the years, is kind of hone in on a definition that works for me and works for the clients that I have, helped and encountered. So for me, dance movement therapy is the use of movement within the therapeutic relationship to assess, to observe, and to intervene in really, again, not just in the relationship, but in the mental health, the physical health, the psychological well-being of the individual. So to me, that suggests that it's not just about dance. It's not just about the way it looks or a sequence of movements or this idea of choreography, but it's really accessing everyone's individual ability to move and to be in their bodies and to become more aware of their movement habits, especially in relationship to our psyche and our mental health. It's accessible to everyone. But as we're finding out and kind of uncovering more and more, that not everybody understands what that connection is. So that's really what dance movement therapy is to me. Traditionally, it is a psychotherapy that uses movement to integrate, ideally, the mind, the body, and the spirit.
So how would you say that it really works? Why does it work for people? What is it bringing that's different to, I guess, more of a talk psychotherapy?
So what I find, or the reason, I guess, again, that I've kind of focused on in terms of why it works, because this is the question we get a lot, right? Especially from prospective clients.
Sure.
Why would this work, right? Why should I do this over talk therapy? And what I always say, and how I try to explain it, is that most of our communication is not in the words or even the tone of voice that we use. 80% conservatively, thanks to research that has been done years and years ago and continues to be done, 80% of our communication is embodied. It's in our body, it's in our cells, and how we move, how we express ourselves non-verbally, and through body language, of course. So I will kind of start there and let people who are either interested or are doing the work, or again, prospective clients, kind of sit with that for a moment of just how much is going on underneath the surface or behind those words, or how often have you not been able to find the words to express what you're feeling. Furthermore, we get stuck. I've had actually clients come to me and say, in talk therapy, I run out of things to say. And the therapist isn't necessarily able to provide a deeper level or a deeper level of processing to either create awareness around what's happening or to circumvent the lack of words. So that to me is why not just dance movement, but like body and movement is so vital in therapy, because we're doing ourselves a disservice if we are not focusing on that 80+% of communication.
So it sounds like it's really getting deeper into the conversation with ourselves and our own bodies. Often I think when people think of body language, where it's very relational, it's like, well, if somebody does this, what is that telling me? But it sounds like you're also digging into when I move in a particular area, what is it telling me about myself?
Absolutely. There is so much that our body is telling us all the time. And I think in this day and age, especially, we are accustomed to silencing it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's conscious. And oftentimes we do it so many times that then it becomes unconscious. It becomes a habit. So whether that's, simply taking an over-the-counter medication to reduce pain, right? I always say pain is a signal. We treat it as a punishment, but pain is a signal, and your body is trying to tell you something, not just this hurts, but why does this hurt? Does it need further attention? Is it something that built up because of stress in the body? And if we address that stress, perhaps that pain wouldn't exist or would be lessened, or there's something we could do with that pain. I realize that's a generalization, but it's just one example of how we need to listen to what our body is telling us. And it's not just about how we express ourselves. It's not just the hand gestures, the face, the affect that we use, but literally the signals, the symptoms that our body possesses, and the ability for it to communicate to us is greater than we realize, than most of us even, understand its potential.
Yeah. And I'm curious how you get people to, I guess, to have that greater level of awareness. I know when I work with I'm coach, so I coach people using a lot of embodied tools. Mm-hmm. And often I'll be saying, well, how are you feeling in your body? And they literally don't know how to answer the question. And mm-hmm. I tend to try and make it very granular for them and just say, well, what about this? What about this? But what's your approach to that when people maybe just are so disconnected that they're not even aware of what they're doing in their body?
That actually is the norm for the people that I see. Mm-hmm. I would say more often than not, although I appreciate so much when somebody comes in and has so much awareness, either they're a body practitioner themselves or they've done the work, so to speak, that's lovely. It's always great when it's like, wow, this is actually making it a little bit easy for me. And now I can really dive into some juicy body interventions. But that's not the norm. I would say more often than not, the individuals that I'm seeing are completely disembodied, disconnected. Some are aware of it, right? I've had individuals maybe that, have disordered eating and have really consciously shut down feeling anything in the body. And that's how they regulate. It may be maladaptive and unhealthy, but that's their form of coping. Mm-hmm. And then I've had individuals who have absolutely no awareness, right? They don't even recognize what I see just sitting across from them. Like, your body's kind of twitching, you look really tight, you're closed, you're not making eye contact. There's just no awareness whatsoever. And so I think that sometimes that's how it starts in movement therapy. It's a lot of this mirroring, and it's not a calling out, right? Like, it's not a shaming, like, oh my God, you're not doing this. Oh, that's not right. Oh, that's bad. We're not trying to judge. It's just creating awareness, highlighting what's seen in the room, right? I'm noticing your gaze is down, right? And sometimes just inviting that person or creating awareness around what they're currently doing allows them to become aware. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, right? Like, oh, I didn't realize I was looking down. Okay, well, now I have this knee-jerk reaction to look up. And what happens, right? How does that feel looking at me? Oh, maybe I'm intimidated. I'm scared. It feels vulnerable. I don't feel safe. Okay, then look back down. So it's just inviting what we already see in the room. And I find that just that little bit unlocks the curiosity in most of my clients, if not all of them, to want to go further, right? Like, wow, what else am I doing that I'm not aware of, And is this why I'm here? Like, is this why my relationships are not where I want them to be? Is this why I can't hold a job? Is this, and down and down and down, realizing that what we are doing and how we're living in our body plays out everywhere, So it's not so much an intervention, so to speak, as just noticing what's in the room, and allowing people to sit in that, as uncomfortable as that may be. is often the place I start. And like I said, it kind of just opens the window for more opportunity.
Yes, and I think you were saying about mirroring, and I've done some exercises in training and things as well, where, for example, I've walked around a room and then somebody else has really watched closely and then tried to mirror how they perceived me to walk, and it may not be exact, but it's really fascinating to watch someone walking how you walk, or indeed to try and walk in the way that someone else walks, and get a completely different experience of the world. It always seems extraordinary to me, but I'm imagining you see this quite a lot, where you actually make maybe quite a subtle change. You know, I had someone say once, it looks like you're kind of charging across the room, and I was like, yeah, that's my London walk, when I'm walking through the centre of town and I'm on a mission, I'm just going, and it's quite a distinctive way of being, and you realize you're actually embodying this is what it's like when I'm in a hurry and I have to get somewhere in the centre of London, you know, as opposed to something else. But I imagine you see quite a lot of that as well, where people are bringing different things, or just, as you say, noticing in one circumstance I behave in a particular way, and maybe there's a different way in another part of their life.
Yeah, and I think that brings in this mind-body connection, that it's not just what I'm thinking. It's not just, okay, now I need to be professional. And if I think professional, then I will be professional, and my body just falls in line, so to speak. But we can actually approach it the other way, right? What if I'm not thinking professionally? What does that look like in my body, and how do I bring that to the table? Because so often there's a disconnect, there's a dissonance, right? My body says one thing, my mind is kind of saying another. The example I love to give is of a, we'll say, I don't know, I hate to say typical, neurotypical adolescent. You know, you ask them, how was school today, honey? And they say, great, it was the best day I ever had. You know, it's like monotone. There's no inflection. Absolutely. The body is completely still. You're like, really? It doesn't sound like the best day you ever had. I just don't want to talk. Okay. You know? But so we need to really have an awareness when things are out of balance, you know? So if it's conscious decision, that's one thing, but often than not, you know, it's more often than not, it's not conscious, and there's a complete, again, disconnect between the mind and the body. So I do see that a lot. I mean, one of the techniques in dance movement therapy is mirroring. And I think what was difficult maybe for me at first in my schooling was this idea of mirroring, but not copying, right? Mirroring, but not that I mock people, but sometimes it feels like you're mocking the other person, especially if it's not your movement, right? This feels funny. And then I start laughing, and then it's like, oh wait, I'm not respecting that person's movement. So really having to hone that and just moving the way you see it, and then giving the individual the empowerment, the ability to say, that's not right. Yeah. Or, oh, that's exactly what I do. I've never seen that before, right? I didn't notice that. And giving them the power and encouraging them to kind of run with that, right? Well, how would you change that? What do you want to do with it? How can we, you know, move this pattern or habit that's coming up? And more often than not, the mirroring is totally, I don't know how to put it. It's conscious, but it's not, let's stand, I mean, we can do this, but it's not always in the context of let's stand and move together. Sometimes it's just mirroring posture, mirroring tone of voice, you know, when sitting down talking to a client. If they're talking very quietly and slowly, I'm going to try to mirror that in my approach as well, because if I'm loud and strong, it can start to feel very abrasive, and then we wonder why our clients don't come back. You know, like, absolutely, it was a very good session. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, it's about creating connection and empathy and compassion as well, isn't it?
Through the body and through our communication. Absolutely. Yes.
Great. So I know that you trained as a talk therapist as well as a dance movement therapist. So I guess I'm curious as to which came first. How do you see the two things complementing each other?
So oddly enough, they came together. The master's program that I went to was specifically dance movement therapy and counseling. And so that very easily answers that question. It wasn't the chicken or the egg, it was together. the ironic thing is it ended up being a dual program, because in so many states, especially across the United States, dance movement therapy isn't recognized on its own. So again, we place importance on the mind and the psychology of the mind, not necessarily just the body. So our program was set up that way so that when we graduated, we would have licensure. We could sit for licensure that made us legitimate in the state of, at least where I am in the state of Illinois. So that I practice as a dance movement therapist, but that wasn't necessarily what the state recognized. They wanted to see a counseling or, a psychotherapy in their kind of governmental, infrastructure. And then dance therapy kind of became the intervention that I use in my counseling practice. So I don't see them as separate. I see them as together. But like I said, because we tend to place so much importance on psychology, mind, body kind of coming second, that it was necessary in order for me to practice the way I wanted to practice in my state.
Okay. And so when did you first realize that the body was so important? Has this been something that's always been with you, or is it something that came upon you at some point in your life and you had a realization about it?
I would say a little of column A, a little of column B. My first instinct, like my gut reaction to that question was, no, I didn't always know that. And even when I was getting my master's degree, I was very much in my head. I knew that. And there was like a resistance to go into the body as well, which is, people are like, but then why would you become a dance therapist if there's resistance? But to work through that myself is really important so that then I can help clients through that as well. And I'm still very much in my head, but now I know how to regulate that, or I'm continuing to learn how to regulate that and how to really practice what I preach. So I think growing up, I knew, especially as a dancer, or identifying myself as a dancer from a young age, it was a form of expression. It was an outlet for sure. But as I got older, realizing that it was almost more of an escape. That I could be someone else, do something else, put on another persona. And what I came to the realization of was that it helped me move through difficult places in my life. So had I not had that outlet or shut down, I don't know, things might look very different. But because I was able to literally move through and embody some difficult emotions that I wasn't even aware of, it really helped me overcome and create more resilience in my body, which translated to my mind. So I would say my awareness now, as it is, how I talk about movement and mental health, very much came after I got my master's degree. And the more I worked with clients, realizing, wow, we literally are how we move. And if we never challenge the way we move and those ingrained habits and patterns, then we never grow. We never change who we are. And we feel like we're stuck. But we have so much power to change ourselves. We just don't even realize it.
So you've touched a couple of times on the impact of being able to move our body in terms of our mental health. And so could you tell us a little bit more about your approach to that, how you think about it?
Sure. Again, I think a lot of dance movement therapists think along these lines. I wouldn't say it's necessarily preached or educated, right? This isn't necessarily part of the curriculum of dance movement therapy, but as dance movement therapists and somatic practitioners and somatic movement therapists, this makes sense to a lot of people. But what I really started to resonate with and hone in on was just the power of really body awareness and body movement for mental health. And not just do these exercises and you'll feel better, engage in this type of movement, you'll release endorphins, it'll boost your mood. But actually starting to break down how you currently move, how that contributes to your mental health or hinders your mental health, and what are ways that we can change that? What are things that you can do to repattern, reintegrate, or create, new habits in the body to then support the mind and mental health. Yeah. So, oftentimes it's facilitated by me, but I very much just try to bring clients into an awareness of how they currently move. So what time are you in? Are you fat? Like you were talking about your London walk, right? Do we always operate from a place of go, go, go? Maybe we operate from a place of always slow and procrastinating and never getting anywhere on time, and certainly not early. What's the reason for that? Why have we moved that way? And if that's not how you want to operate, how do we find the spectrum, right? How do we move to fast, slow, and in between? So that's just time. There's space, there's weight, how we carry weight in our body, how bound or loose we are in our bodies. So this is all touching on a bit of movement analysis. And I just tried to break it down and make it as accessible as possible to people that had no idea what I was talking about. And how to start breaking down your movement. What do I do? How do I move? Instead of just saying, well, I went for a run today. Like, okay, but that's not the only way you moved. Didn't you get out of bed? You brush your teeth, wash your face? Oh yeah, I did. Okay.
And I guess also
outsourcing
how
so
did
much.
You go for a run? In what way were you running? How did that change at different points?
Exactly. And now that we're outsourcing so much movement, especially in this pandemic, which for a lot of us is necessary, I worry that we're not going to go back to the way things were in terms of getting our own food, getting out of the car, not all of this curbside that we have in the United States right now. It's like we've already outsourced so much movement before the pandemic. What's it going to look like after?
Yeah, interesting. And I know that you talk about something called body talk, and you also give some of your clients what you call movement prescriptions. And I'm really curious to find out a bit more about those. Can you share?
Sure. Well, body talk, again, I don't think I didn't coin that phrase, but one day it kind of occurred to me that we always say, speak your mind. And so I said, why don't we say speak your body? Like, why do we always assume that the mind is the one that calls the shots and has the things to say? So, I was just started to talk to my clients about, like, if your body could talk, what would it say? And to me, that's really what body talk is. It's like, what's your body saying when words aren't an option, right? Whether it's not relying on words, whether it's you cannot access your words or you were born unable to access verbal language. What would it look like if we just let our body talk? And rather than saying, body language or, expressing a particular thing, just letting the body do the talking. Kind of like in psychology or psychotherapy, like a free association. Freud would just kind of have somebody sit on the couch and just start talking. We can do the same thing with our bodies, and just see what comes up, see what happens. How is your body speaking today? And what does it want to say? And when we let it do the talking, oftentimes that's where the work starts, right? I'll have clients say, I don't really have anything to say. Okay, what's your body have to say? They're like, I don't know. Well, let's see, and something happens or moves, and then we get to inquire, why did it do that? What did that feel like? How are you feeling about that? And then with prescriptions, I don't know. To be honest, Mark would appreciate this. It was probably more of a marketing tactic than anything else. Okay. I was scrolling the internet, and I have physician friends, and they have prescription pads, and I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if I had a pad that I just wrote my prescriptions on? Well, you can't get a prescription pad unless you're able to write prescriptions, but they have novelty ones, kind of fake ones. And actually what inspired me was several years ago, I had a client who was on Medicare. As a counselor, I cannot bill Medicare, but I do bill other insurances. Mm-hmm. And her physician actually wrote a prescription for dance movement therapy, and bless her heart, thought that it was actually going to cover it. And so I had to explain to her, it'll cover it if we do it in your clinic. Right? Like, will you sign off on the work? Because that's how Medicare will cover it. And she was like, oh, I can't do that. I said, I didn't think you could, but I'm just trying to educate you. And I look at that prescription every day. I have it on my desk, and I was like, there might be something to that. Yeah. So I made a novelty pad of paper, and I started writing down the interventions that we used in our sessions as a kind of prescription that my clients could take home as reminders.
Okay.
And so I kind of started calling interventions prescriptions, and so many clients were like, I don't take this medication anymore. So I said, well, here's a movement prescription. There's a quote medication that you can take every day, and it's not going to have any bad side effects.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we don't need medications, right? It was never supposed to be a replacement, but it was kind of, again, like novelty, kind of marketing. And it's funny because it really stuck. And a lot of clients were like, can I have my prescription today? Or like, what's my movement prescription? I'm like, well, we did a body scan, so that'll be one. We walked.
It. Really
It was,
yeah,
it was just kind of gimmicky.
See how it gives people kind of structure and something that feels a bit concrete that they're taking away. And there's also, I imagine, some kind of permission around it that you've now got permission to make time in your day to move, because I think that's certainly with my clients, I often see that they feel they don't have the time to do these things for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If they can say, actually, I've got a prescription from my therapist that says I need to spend 30 minutes doing dancing or whatever they're doing.
Right.
Actually, it's a way of creating the space in the day to do that.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I appreciate that. And I've actually, I remember seeing articles coming out of the UK in particular where physicians were prescribing nature, and I thought, well, who said a prescription had to be something fillable at a pharmacy?
Absolutely.
Right. And I understand that I cannot clinically write prescriptions. I'm not a PhD, I'm not a PsyD, I'm not a clinical psychologist or an MD, but I can certainly write a prescription for nature. I can write a prescription on movement, which is my area of expertise. And it's things that the clients already know how to do because we've done them in our sessions. So it's nothing that they're trying. It's not like, here's a list of exercises that you should never try on your own because you might get hurt. Right? So it was very permission giving. And like I said, it was kind of many reasons as to how it unfolded, but noticing that people were writing prescriptions that didn't actually require a pharmacist was very intriguing to me. And so I just kind of ran with it, and it's stuck so far. So
I really love it. I think it's a great reframing, really great reframing, and yeah, just a good way of getting people to think about things.
It's turned into Movement Prescription Mondays, to be honest. Like every day, every week, I try to give a little, again, like a prescription that everybody can take with them. And I usually put them up on like social media or send them in a newsletter. And I've had some people comment like, thanks, this is the reminder that I needed, or like you said, creating more space in the day just to give myself permission to move.
I really like it. It's great. And I guess I'm curious as to what changes you've seen when people suddenly start to access maybe their inner dancer. What changes have you seen in your clients or in people's lives?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, not many clients use that term, right? Like, it's very rare that a client will leave or maybe even terminate after our sessions or years of therapy and say like, oh, now I feel like a dancer. I don't think for the most part, I don't know if they'll feel any more of a dancer when they leave compared to when they came in. But I think what happens is they're meeting goals, psychosocial goals that sometimes they don't even know that they're reaching. Like I'll have a client after a few months kind of either forget to tell me something in a session, or it's an afterthought, and it's almost the reason that they started therapy, right? And I'll say, well, that's interesting. That didn't come up until 5 minutes before our session ends. That wasn't a big concern? No, not really. I dealt with it. I managed it. And I was like, you what? Say that again? And it's almost like they don't even realize that through this work, they are starting to manage things that before felt so overwhelming. So that to me, I think is the big piece. It's not just, oh, you're moving better. Oh, you're more coordinated, which isn't always a goal. If a client is actually coming and we're using dance as the catalyst, like working with maybe Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, then they may say, oh, it's improved my social engagement. My dancing has improved and I didn't think it would. But I think more often than not, it's just seeing that first time that somebody's instinctual habit isn't the instinct anymore. It's the afterthought. That to me is always really powerful. And when the client doesn't even realize it, that I say, wait a minute, I think I have to point this out to you. You just told me something that would have totally thrown you for a loop, and you would have been in a spiral for 2 weeks over it. And you just managed it in less than 2 hours. Let's talk about that. And what did you use? What were the tools that you found helpful? And then they're like, well, what did I do? Well, I guess I did that breathing thing we talked about. Oh, I did scan my body to see how I was feeling about all of this. And the first time they don't call you, it's not like, oh my God, this just happened, I need to process this with you, but that they waited an entire week or two until our next session. That's always encouraging, and continues to reinforce to me that, wow, something is working, right? That this whole body mind thing is, I think, really where the future, or the past coming back to the future, is where we need to be.
And that sounds like those moments of empowerment, as you say, when they're moving from, I'm going to call you every time something happens, to actually, I now have resources where I can manage this more on my own, which obviously is what we always want for all of our clients, is that they get to that point of empowerment.
Yeah, and that it's in your body. I always say, like, I'm not one for really prescribing homework. I guess that's why we have prescriptions. But I always say, like, it's up to you if you do them. I'm not going to check in with you. I'm not going to ask you how often you did it. If you are committed to this and to yourself, then you'll find the way to do it. So I think, just allowing that space and time too, of how often we want to engage in these practices, how quickly we want to see changes happen, is also another way to kind of allow the client to be empowered, and realize that it's right here. Like, I don't have to go buy anything. I can read a book. That's helpful. Maybe a workbook every now and then, or I can buy a journal so I can write in it. But I always say, like, ideally the expense will be the therapy itself, but you'll find you have so many resources that are free, and when we learn to access them, it feels like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
And something you've always got with you. You've always got your body with you, so that that's something, as you say, you can always access. And you mentioned working with people with Alzheimer's, and I'm curious to hear a bit more about that. I think it's a growing experience for lots of people. Their family members have Alzheimer's, and how do you work with them? What benefits do they get?
So that was actually where I started my journey. When I was in graduate school, we had 2 interns. Well, they call it a field placement, which was about 3 months. And then we had a year-long internship. And my internship was with older adults, specifically at a day program with varying degrees of dementia, mostly Alzheimer's. And I really fell in love with working with those people. I think it was my pace. It was my speed. I didn't have to be real quick with my interventions because they were still kind of moving and I could slowly think about my next step. So just timing wise, it felt right. And I loved the ability to be playful and creative with wise, knowledgeable beings, people that had lived entire lives, and just because they weren't remembering things didn't mean that body knowledge went away. So being the one that brought in the body knowledge or tapped into their body knowledge was very exciting. So that actually is where my work started. And that was, for me, how I was kind of able to, I guess in a sense, make a name for myself in some area, especially in my region, as a dance movement therapist, because everyday people didn't get it. They didn't know they needed it. They didn't understand the connection. They were going to the gym. It was very hard for me to say, well, wait, if you move your body differently, your depression may feel different, or you may have less anxiety. So it was really important to find that niche, and that's where I started. So when I ventured out to start my own company, which wasn't my first idea, again, it was like, how am I going to do this work? Nobody's hiring. Maybe I should do it myself. Okay. That entrepreneurial spirit. I went to a clinic, a very well-known clinic in Chicago. And I remember talking to the director and many of the social workers. And I said, what happens when you're working with a patient that can no longer talk to you?
Mm-hmm.
Their words aren't making sense. They have aphasia. Maybe they just can't talk. They've lost the ability to verbally communicate. And they said, we terminate them. Like, we can't help them anymore because we can't communicate with them.
Wow.
And so I spent the next not even 10 minutes explaining how that's where movement therapy picks up.
Yeah.
Because this person could be living with this disease for another 20 years. So you're telling me that they have no emotional outlet, no way to express what's going on. And then I started to say, like, you're suggesting, or are you suggesting that if you can't speak, you have nothing to say? Because we know that's not true. And then they get lumped in as behaviors. Well, this person's aggressive, so we have to sedate them. This person, bites, hits, screams. That's because they have no emotional outlet. There's no way for you to help them get that out if you're just trying to talk to them. Mm. So that was my in, and started to get clients that way, and then just referrals and kind of, snowballed from there. And then it just became a natural transition where I actually got to start working with the people I originally wanted to work with, right? Of just everyday people walking down the street, stressed out, completely, dysregulated, looking for ways to manage and cope, and resources that were accessible. So it's interesting, like, kind of having this full circle in a sense of where I really wanted to work, where I ended up finding a niche, and then coming back to the population I really enjoy engaging with. And I still work with Alzheimer's. It's a group work that I do a lot of, a couple times a week. I engage in a lot of memory cafes, which are looking very different these days because of the pandemic. But it almost feels like a recuperation for me. I love going back to my groups and working with older adults because it reminds me really of where I started in terms of accessing body knowledge, and that our older adults have so much to offer, so much to give. But if we rely on those words, we may never hear them.
Absolutely. So I'm curious if any of our listeners have family members perhaps who have dementia, or people that they're involved with. Is there anything you can suggest that they might try with them to help them to express their feelings? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about awareness. So giving yourself permission to just observe. I think so often we feel like we have to intervene, especially if we're seeing something that feels really uncomfortable for us. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an incessant humming or a tapping, and it's like, oh my God, if I hear that tapping one more time. But that may be very soothing to that person. And so just try to sit back and observe the movements, the sounds, the nonverbal communication that's happening with your care partner, loved one, spouse, whoever it is. And then start asking the question of, how can I relate to them using what I'm seeing? So if this person is tapping and it's not causing any harm, right? It's not like an aggressive, like beating themselves or scratching until they bleed. If it's just a tapping, can I join them in that tapping? Can I bring in an instrument? Like maybe they'll bang on a drum, and notice how that then facilitates relationship, because they may look up at you, they may reach for you, they may laugh, you may laugh. Like there's opportunity for connection, and giving ourselves permission to understand that it may be fleeting, that it's not going to turn into a huge conversation. But if it's a moment of connection that wasn't there prior, that's a big shift. So noticing, joining in what you're seeing, if it's possible, if it's safe, and then just using music. I mean, put on music that you think they would recognize, or that they, listened to or love to listen to, and engage in dance. I mean, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Just because it works one day doesn't mean it will the next. So it's being patient and adventurous in some sense. But I find that when movement is hard to access for whatever reason, that music is often the key that unlocks the movement. Mm-hmm. So put on a rhythm, put on a favorite song, and you'll start to see movement happen. Maybe it's a tapping of the toes or a humming to the music, and then you can join them in that as well.
So it sounds like really trying to meet them where they are, rather than going in with a we're going to do this today, but just sort of saying, where are they? What are they doing? How can I, as you say, make a connection whilst we're doing that, and see if that creates a shift.
Exactly. Because think about it, for us, if somebody came in and tried to push their own agenda, we wouldn't want that either. But then ideally we can say, stop, don't do that. You know, why are you here? That person may not have the ability to say it verbally. And then we have to recognize how they say it physically. And if we're not even intentional with being aware of body language, or just observing what their body looks like and how they move, we can't recognize those signals. So yes, ideally, exactly. Like that's what I do with my clients, is I just meet them where they are, you know, and I may have goals for them, but if it's not going to look that way today, or the thought, you know, the interventions I was going to bring in aren't working, then I just throw them out and meet that person where they are, and try something different. And we have to give ourselves, as the caregivers, the care partners, the same permission.
Yeah, I love this sense of co-creation with clients. I think that as soon as we start trying to force things on people, or say, I've got a great idea and this is going to fix you, we've basically lost it at that point, I always think. So it's always like, let's experiment, let's play, let's see what happens, and see where it takes us.
And that's kind of hard, I think, today, because there are, for the most part, or I should say there is for the most part, this like, just tell me how to fix it, right? Like we're in this instant gratification era, right? Where I don't know the answer to that. Let me ask Siri, you know? And I jokingly say, like, you can't ask Siri what you feel in your body. She doesn't know the answer to that one. So it's not going to be instant, because we have to sit in it and understand and feel it for ourselves. And I think more people are open to that, but it is hard with the way things are today, that it may not be instant. We may have to really sit in that and work on that for quite some time.
Yeah, it can be pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Is there anything from a safety perspective, or things people should be thinking about if they do want to bring more dance or more movement into their lives generally?
So, I mean, in terms of dance, and this isn't always like my area of expertise, so to speak, you know, I think when you're engaging in some type of dance, it's very important that, well, one, that you have permission from your doctor, right? That you don't have any underlying conditions that may exacerbate, you know, that dance would exacerbate, and be really realistic with what you are looking to achieve versus, you know, your capabilities at the moment. So that's really dance specifically. But if you're looking at just using movement or being more embodied, to me, there aren't too many safety precautions that have to happen, because it's always coming from your own capacity. So I'm not suggesting that you move a certain way. I'm asking to join you in your movement, right? What would that look like? And so if someone, although there may be more potential for movement, if they're afraid to move, or if there's pain around that movement, more often than not, they're not gonna, like, I shouldn't say this, because some people will push through that, but for the most part, somebody isn't gonna knowingly re-injure or do something that is gonna make, you know, more harm. And that's the beauty, I think, of dance movement therapy, is like, again, just meeting that person where they are. So if they're not able to reach their arms out completely to the side, either physically or just emotionally, it's feeling too vulnerable, then we just move where we are in the moment until it feels right to transition or stretch out a bit more. So I think you have to be clear with what you're hoping to get out of it. Are you looking at using movement and dance for release, right? For therapeutic, in a therapeutic way? Or are we looking to use dance and movement as a way to connect to the self? And one, I think, has a little bit more safety implication, whereas the other is really just referencing and resourcing ourselves in the moment. And I think we all know that dance is actually one of the best forms of exercise, because it hits everything, right? It taps into every sense and every, region of the brain, so to speak. But we're also in a day and age, keep saying this, but where we see dance as a certain way. It has to look like, you know, world of dance, or so you think you can dance. And some of our young students, our young people are really trying to push their bodies beyond what they should be doing. I feel like when you connect to yourself and you know what your own limits are, injury is a lot less, you're a lot less prone to those injuries because you don't force yourself beyond your capacity. So hopefully that it kind of addresses like the need for safety in both regions, but how safety isn't necessarily, it's more emotional safety I look at in terms of therapy than the actual physical safety.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, a lot of it, certainly when I dance, I wouldn't class myself as a beautiful dancer, but I find a huge amount of joy in it. So it's finding the joy in the movement as opposed to, do I look like I'm amazingly dancing?
Right, it's like the judgment.
Trying to let go of some of that self-judgment, as you say, and the way the world is today, there's a lot of judgment about, do you look good as you're doing it? And it's like, actually, it's just, if you can flow into the moment, certainly for me, when I do 5 rhythms and things like that, I just want to let go, have an amazing time.
Yeah.
And not worry about how I'm looking.
Right. And then the safety actually just becomes, do I have enough space around me? You know, like, is the furniture going to prevent me from moving? Or furniture, isn't that funny? I'm so used to moving in my house now. Is there, you know, anything in my way? How close am I to the person next to me? Am I going to, you know, bump into them? So, again, like, I feel like when we are more in touch with ourselves, then we're more in touch with our environment and our kinesphere. So safety ends up being something that we can be more aware of for ourselves.
Yes.
But yeah, this idea of like physical versus emotional safety, they should both be present, I believe. But again, like within a therapy setting, I'm really intentional with, don't push your emotional safety beyond its boundaries or limits, as opposed to like, how high is your leg going to get, you know, or how many pirouettes will we do today? Which I don't think I've ever said in any of my sessions. So
I'm curious also about your perspective on actually bringing embodiment into movement, because it's very easy to move in quite a disembodied way. We just move our bodies without really having that sense of awareness. What's your perspective on that, and perhaps how people can be more embodied in the way that they move?
Yeah, so I can't remember how long ago, but recently I actually wrote an article about dancing from a disembodied place. And I think that sounds counterproductive, or that sounds counterintuitive. It's like, if I'm in my body, how am I disembodied? Yeah. But to me, that speaks to where your mind-body connection is when you're engaging in dance. And that the more I've talked to dancers, professional dancers in particular, there can be a real hesitancy in using the body for mental health because of the fear of what it will do for my performance. And ironically, I always say, as a dancer, not a professional, but like as a dancer myself, I think my dancing got better the more in touch I got with myself. I'm more balanced, I'm more connected, I'm more aware of my own limits, you know, in a healthy way. So it's interesting, like we can definitely dance from a disembodied place if we're not aware of how our movements are impacting ourselves. You know, if I'm just trying to get a certain aesthetic, on the other spectrum, like if I'm dancing a piece of music or a piece of choreography that's triggering, but I'm not aware of it, I can have a panic attack later, right? I could spiral emotionally out of control later and not have any idea why, you know, realizing like, oh, I was triggered because of this set of music or because of the move that I did that actually brought my mind back to a time that I was, I don't know, in danger, right? So it's difficult, I think, because we don't start dancing from that place. You know, as a 3-year-old, I was not taught to be embodied as I was learning ballet and jazz. And then that kind of gets perpetuated until somebody says, how are you feeling as you move this piece of music? You know, or what's coming up in your body as you jete across the floor? And that's not the norm, I don't think, in dance, but we are starting to refocus and starting to be very intentional with like mental health and trauma-informed approaches in dance specifically. So, you know, I think for like any dancers that may be listening, it's again, starting with just awareness. Like, what do I notice before I go into my dance class? Can I check in during? And if not, then certainly checking in with myself after the dance class. Is my mood the same? Is it different? Is it more positive? Is it more negative? What happened in that class that contributed to it? Much like we would, I think, on social media, like I'm having a good day. I go onto Instagram, I'm scrolling. And then all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, I'm like, why am I in such a bad mood? What happened? Oh, maybe it was something I saw on my phone, We need to be doing that in our aerobics, in our exercise, in our dance. And I guarantee that getting more in touch with yourself will not negatively impact your performance, even though it feels like it will, and it feels very scary because we do it from such a mindless place so often.
I think that sounds incredibly powerful, Erica, this sense of not being mindless as we're moving. I like to, when I get up in the morning, so I do breath work as well as coaching, and I get up in the morning and I do about 10 or 15 minutes. I start with the slowest movement possible and just seeing, and then I do some breath work and then I meditate. But there's something about being really thoughtful, not necessarily thinking, but like really noticing and feeling, how am I feeling today? Some days I wake up and I don't really want to do it, or I start and I'm kind of like, oh, this was quite hard and a bit stiff. And then by the end of it, I always feel better. It definitely gives a positive mood shift for me.
Yeah.
But I think that whole point about not being mindless as we move, it's very easy to be mindless as we move.
Yeah. And I'm sure people, either they're listening to this or I'm just hearing in my head, well, but I have a paycheck, right? Like I have to move that way or I'm going to get fired, right? Or somebody else is going to become prima ballerina. And so that's not to say that we shouldn't do it. I mean, sometimes if it's your job, that's what you're paid for. I understand that conundrum. I think that's when it's even more important that we provide an outlet after the fact. What am I going to do to make sure that I regain my sense of self after this performance or after what may be a very abusive or aggressive class, session, whatever that looks like. Not that makes it okay, but again, meeting each other where we are, meeting myself where I am in my process, that if it's not my MO to say, I'm out of here, I can't take this one more time because I have to put bread on the table and this is my livelihood, then what am I going to do to make sure that I am mindful and bodyful through my career, through my job? And again, I think that actually supports, a longer career. It manages our injuries, or if we get injured, it gets us back working faster than it would if we're mindless through the process.
And that also sounds, again, going back to this sense of empowerment, how, if I'm aware of what this is doing to me, whether that's positive or maybe not so positive, I have the possibility to re-resource myself. So that's very empowering. Like, even if we're in a situation that perhaps we don't, we do have to do something, it gives us the power back. Sounds really important.
Yeah. I think to have that agency, and not just in dance, but I can speak from my own experience. My own perfectionistic tendencies. Sometimes we're what's the word, like assuaged, like perpetuated, but also kind of stroked, right? Like, oh, I just got it perfect. Or like, oh, somebody really enjoyed that performance, or oh, that felt good. It's very validating, but it can also, again, perpetuate continued harm, and then where else am I seeking perfectionism? And if I don't achieve what I think that is or looks like, how do I deal with that? When we're moving all the time and then it becomes our career, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, that we have to be really intentional and careful about. But even outside of dance, high interval training is kind of trendy these days. And I will tell my clients, like, we'll look at, like, how are you exercising? Do you want to exercise? Not that that's a goal in movement therapy, but they'll say, oh, I'm already moving. Yeah, I do, high interval training 3 times a week. I'm like, okay, is that actually hindering your process? Because you just told me how you're always go, 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 move, never stop. And you're actually engaging in exercise that's perpetuating that pattern. So maybe do your higher interval training if it's something that you really enjoy and it really does feel good for you. But can you couple it with a different type of movement? What is something that you can use to diversify your movement profile? And if yoga isn't right or meditation is too slow for you to start off, then maybe it's just taking a walk in your neighborhood, you know, not always getting that adrenaline rush or that, you know, really sweaty, active heart rate, right? So just thinking of different ways to engage in our movement and how the ways we are currently moving may be keeping us where we are, which sometimes is where we don't want to be.
Yeah. And it's about getting that balance. That's what it really sounds like. How do we get balance in all of these different areas so that we've got the thing that feels good because it's fast and it's frenetic and maybe that feels like it suits, but we also have the sense of rest and restoration and the time to reflect and slow down. We're much more balanced in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like if we're, in a sense, if we're balanced in our bodies, and I don't just mean like, you know, standing on one foot, not tipping over, but if we can find balance and grounding in our body, then we can find balance and grounding in other areas of our lives.
Yeah. So I've got a couple more questions for you because we are all of a sudden coming to the end of our time together. But I wanted to ask you, as a therapist, people often think that we've got all the answers and that we do everything. But it's, you know, it's a difficult time at the moment. We're in a global pandemic. Life's really hard. So I'm curious as how you manage your own mental health at the moment. If you've got anything you can share from that.
Yeah, well, when I can, I'll let you know. No, I'm just kidding. I'll get back to you on that one. No, I think, you know, definitely reflecting on my own patterns and habits. Obviously, like for me, it's very much about engaging in my own therapy. You know, I make sure that I have somebody holding me accountable, you know, even though I think I do a pretty good job of holding myself accountable. But I try to be very aware of at least taking time to notice what I'm feeling. You know, like, I am, maybe it's physical, like I'm really hot right now. Did I just run, or is there something physical, you know, or emotional that's happening, you know, that my body is like producing a lot of heat? Am I feeling anxious, you know? And if there's really nothing happening around me to make me anxious, why is that manifesting that way, you know? Because everything right now for me is really happening at home, I also have to be very careful with my boundaries, you know, and that just because it seems like I have the time or the space, because I'm not traveling, so to speak, doesn't mean that my time is any less important, you know, and that I'm only as good of a therapist. I can only help my clients really if I help myself, you know, and make sure that I'm in a good place. So that definitely has on times looks like, you know, talking to my own clients and saying like, you know, I don't do this often, but saying like, is it possible for us to reschedule? My environment right now is not conducive for a confidential session, and you deserve that, right? And for the most part, again, it hasn't happened very often, but when it does, clients are very supportive because I think we're modeling what they can do, right? Yes. Usually if a client's in a not great space, that's when they need their session, right? Not really the opposite. But, you know, movement's actually been very hard for me. Not, I guess, in the sense because the habit and the patterns I had going are no longer. I don't have my weekly classes that I can go to. They're not happening. A lot of my movement was in movement with my clients, and that was just diffusing a lot of tension and stress. And I'm seeing clients mostly over Zoom, but the movements are different, right? The caliber and the relationship, the movement relationship has changed. And so I really have to step back and allow myself to find movement where I can get it. And that's been taking a lot more walks in my neighborhood, making sure that I get out when it's a nice day, because I can so easily just get stuck inside. And finding ways to connect with people, even when I can't connect with them the way I wanted to or the way I used to, so finding that social engagement, whether it's over the phone or meeting distantly. It's definitely been a challenge. It's been hard. And I think just like my clients, I have good moments and bad moments, but it's being realistic, trying not to put too much pressure on myself, and just recognizing that I'm only human. And like you said, sometimes our clients think that, we are the expert, we have all the answers, but I'm very transparent with my clients. And I say that a lot. I'm like, I don't have all the answers. I'm here to help you find your answers because they're in your body, and your body is different than mine. So I can't tell you what to think or how to feel. I can just provide the space to help you find what you feel and what you think. And then again, another way to empower them. So a little bit of transparency and just a lot of humanness, of like, this is a hard time for everyone. And as therapists, I think we have to be super compassionate to ourselves because we're so prone to just taking on everything. Everyone needs help. We must help everyone, but we're no good to anyone if we don't help ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a balance for us as much as for the way we work with our clients. Brilliant. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Erica. Where can people find you online if they want to find out more?
Yeah, they can hop on Facebook, find me under Erica Hornthal. I would love if anybody's interested in this work or just wants to hear more or find out more about it. You can join our group in Facebook. It's called Dance Therapy Advocates. I'm not in there a lot, but so many wonderful people from the somatic community are always posting workshops and exercises and just questions. It's really a great community. And also Instagram. I'm the period therapist, period who, period moves, period you. The therapist who moves you. So join me there. My favorite thing is to not just connect virtually, but to actually make a connection off of social media. So feel free to message me or email me, Erica@hornthal.com.
Perfect. Thank you. And do you have any last thoughts, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we finish today?
I'll share my favorite quote, I guess, something I wrote once and then it just kind of stuck with me, and I always like to share it with, outlets or maybe different interviews. I always like to say, the body holds questions to answers the mind doesn't even know to ask. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that we create the space and provide the platform for our body to provide those answers that we don't even know we're looking for.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to meet you, Erica. I really appreciate your time. That was great.